Yes, sir. Absolutely. This is Theology in the Dirt. Man, we're trying to practice our theology in the public square of our homes, our city, and our world. God is indeed holy, and practicing that reality by his followers in the public square is something we're passionate about, and we hope you feel that. You get notes, links to the rest of the podcast at theologyinthedirt.com. My name is Mitchell Jolly.
And I'm Chris Hayes.
Yo, man, what is good?
Man, I had every intention to be like, what's not good was the debate last night. But honestly, now that I'm here, I don't want to even talk about it. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit. Number one, what's good is what's happening in the building around us this week. We've got TBRI training, people from all over. I just think it's so cool how here in Rome, Georgia, dozens and dozens of professionals are getting incredible training that will equip them to train others on such incredible trauma-informed care practices. It's just amazing to me. And you may have more to say on that. I don't know. But the other thing I want to say too is as we record today, it's September 11th. You know, kind of one of those things you just never forget. You remember where you were. I was in college at the time. I won't get to that story, but I just wanted to bring that up to say to all the first responders out there, thank you for what you do. It's an often unthanked job, except for in emergency situations. So we're grateful for all of you. We have some of you that are listeners, and we appreciate everything you guys do. Stay safe today. Thank you and your families.
Yeah, absolutely. And all those on the aftermath of September the 11th, the men and women who put the uniform on and went after the people who did that, and many lost their lives. And so we're grateful for those who didn't get to come home. Yeah, for those who did get to come home, but a part of them died even in combat. And they live with that trauma and are trying to still overcome that today. So, man, we're grateful people for those guys and gals who went after the people who did that. And so, awesome. It is. And I'm with you, man. That's kind of what's good today is TBRI in this place. The fact that this place really is a miracle. Where we record from is nothing more than a miracle. And I say that because you can't replicate this. I don't think it's completely possible to, although we work toward that end, particularly down in Savannah. There's the attempt and work down in Savannah, down on the coast to do there what's happening here because of our work and our people doing that. And just want a big shout out to Jeff and Mary Margaret Maurer, who take seriously what we talk about in regard to domains, your business and scientific skill set that both of them have. They're highly educated, highly trained people, and what they do is they run an amazing work, and they do so at their own expense. Like, they don't get paid for this; it costs them, and so their investment and their belief in the work of seeing families restored in the name of Jesus Christ by working with foster and adoptive care population in Northwest Georgia and really the whole state of Georgia. That started with a vision and has worked itself out into a place where we're value added to the entire state of Georgia and the Southeast. And that's absolutely astounding. And so to have our partner, Texas Christian University and the Care and Purpose Institute for Child Development on campus with us as our partners and co-laborers in this work is absolutely astounding. And so the multiplying effect of today, I think 72 practitioner trainees in the building. And so some of them are scholarships, some of them are full pay, and they're here to get trained to be a practitioner of trust-based relational intervention. If you guys don't know what that is, I would just Google trust-based relational intervention. Go look for Dr. Karen Purvis, our YouTube videos. She's the child whisperer. Dr. Purvis is with the Lord now, a follower of Jesus Christ, who founded this work based on the research of the 60s and the 70s, understanding attachment, understanding the brain, neuroscience, and how the brain is wired and what trauma does to it, and how to work with kids in hard places. And so, man, the Connected Child, Connected Parent, works by Dr. Purvis. Encourage you to go get and read those books, whether you're working with that population or not. Just in parenting in general, understanding those neurological principles will help you be a better parent. And so that's happening in the building this week. We're all involved in that, and it's just stinking cool. So it's awesome that kingdom work is happening. And what's wild is kingdom work is advancing by the hand of the Lord through some people who don't even know it's the hand of the Lord advancing the work.
Right.
Which is mission. And so the work of the Lord is going forward, and it doesn't look like anything that I've ever seen before, and it's freaking cool. And it's then time to, you know what? Shake and bake.
bake.
Shake and bake. Shake and then bake. Shake and bake.
Shake and bake.
It's shake and bake time. Shake and bake, buddy. Shake it before you bake it.
If I didn't get to shake and bake, I was going to start crying again. I've already tuned up to cry once about September the 11th. And so today we want to talk about on the backside of what happened last week at Appalachee High School up in Barrow County here in our home state of Georgia. We're going to talk about school shootings a little bit. We think this is super, super important. And I just want a little parental warning. Chances are some of this might not be best. If you listen to this with your students or your little ones, probably best to not let them hear, because there's some, I'm going to talk about, there's a little history of school shootings. This is not a modern phenomena, right. But I'm also going to talk a little bit about non-gun related school violence also. Because the tendency is around this topic is to make it about guns.
Right.
And what I want people to see is, particularly when I talk about non-gun related school violence, is that the issue is not guns, never has been guns, never will be guns. A gun happens to be an implement of and a tool wielded by a greater problem. And I think as long as we let the narrative revolve around merely being guns, we are missing the point. And some of that is related to the person using the gun, or the person using sexual violence, or the person using a knife, or the person using hazing, or the administration that is okay with certain kinds of hazing or certain kinds of violence. This is a deeper issue than the implement. Recently, and there's a school in Germany where, like in Europe, I'm not even going to go down this rabbit hole. Yeah. But in places in Europe where guns are just completely outlawed, where particularly in Great Britain, where police officers don't even carry guns, they have school stabbings. The issue is not the gun. The issue is what has happened to that image bearer, that their outlet happens to be a place of business or a school in which they execute violence on other image bearers. That's really the issue. Mm-hmm. And I know that that's going to hack off people who want to get rid of guns. And it's maybe going to hack off people who want us to just pound the table about Second Amendment rights. And I want everybody to understand I'm a Second Amendment rights guy. If you could see, I'm a concealed carry guy. I carry all the time. I'm carrying right now. I carry a Glock 19. I believe in Second Amendment. And by the way, the Second Amendment is not hunting rights. I want people to be super clear. The Second Amendment, like if we're going to be a constitutional republic, and we are, mm-hmm. That Second Amendment is not hunting rights. And people say, why do you need a high-capacity magazine to hunt? I'm like, I don't. I hunt. I need one round to hunt. I need a high-capacity magazine because my government needs to be afraid of me. And they need to be afraid of me times 10,000 people who says, no, you're not going to come and steal my land. Eminent domain is an evil. You cannot have that property. And if you come and take that, we will band together and we will stop you. You will not be tyrants anymore. That's what the Second Amendment's for. And so I just want everybody to be clear. We're not going to pound the table on the Second Amendment. We're going to deal with school violence a little bit here, because that's what happened at Appalachee High School, and it happened to be a gun that was used. So first, people may not even know that the very first known school shooting on American soil was in 1764. It was the Enoch Brown School Massacre. Crazy. Enoch Brown was a schoolmaster, and this was in Pennsylvania. I think Greensville or Greensburg. I think it's the modern town currently, but it was a Native American. It was 4 Native Americans they attacked during what was called Pontiac's War. But it was a little school, and Enoch Brown was a schoolmaster, and so they came. There was one surviving student who was able to recount the story, but they came, shot Enoch Brown, and clubbed him and scalped him, shot and clubbed and scalped 10 students. And one surviving student told the story. That's the first recorded school shooting in American history. Enoch Brown School Massacre, 1764. Then you got to come up to the 19th century. That's 1800s. There were sporadic incidents in the 1800s, but one of the most well-known was 1891. It was a shooting at a school in Newburgh, New York. where a 70-year-old man shot several students. Then you got to move to the 20th century, moving up to the 1940s and 60s, recorded. There may be more. This is what I was able to find. Mm-hmm. You have increased urbanization. You have a lot of tension in a lot of urbanized public spaces. And so there was more isolated shootings. So you get 1940, a principal was killed by a student in Pasadena, California. 1956, there was a mass shooting in Michigan where a man opened fire on an elementary school. And so move on up then later, you get into the 70s. And so the next one I was able to find was Cleveland Elementary School in 1979. Brenda Ann Spencer's shooting in San Diego. She killed 2 adults and wounded 8 children. And her famous quote from that was, "I don't like Mondays." Mm. All right. Go to the 1980s, and what's interesting is I think as you move closer to present day, they tend to increase in frequency. Mm. And you can't blame the increased frequency on guns. Guns have no correlation to increased frequency. Does that make sense? Right. Because access is, in fact, it's hard. This is not in my notes, but it's harder to get access to guns today than it was then.
Right.
There's at least a process. There's a background check. Like when I go buy a weapon today, I cannot buy a weapon without a criminal background check. And I have to wait for it to pass before I can purchase that weapon. There's a criminal background check back in the day. You could get anything you want, just here, give the money. You can actually do that today. There are ways to get guns. And this is another problem. People think that if we just have more laws around guns, that's going to decrease gun violence. Law-abiding citizens can get guns unregistered. Criminals don't care about laws. There are ways to get guns without going through the process. But as you notice, the frequency of them increase as laws increase. So there's no correlation. You completely cut them off, people find a way to use them. So anyway, so in 1980, the frequency increases. 1989, Stockton shooting. A man opened fire on a playground in Stockton, California, killed 5 children. You get to the 90s, they increase a little more in frequency. Jonesboro, Arkansas, 1998, 2 middle school students were killed and 4 students and a teacher. 2 middle school students killed, and then 4 other students, I think at the high school, and a teacher were killed. Then you got this one. Everybody knows this one, 1999, the Columbine high school massacre. One of the deadliest school shootings ever. Two students killed 12 peers and 1 teacher before they committed suicide. Klebold and Harris. And then after Columbine, the increased media focus on the issue and debates about gun control, bullying particularly, and mental health began to be appropriately discussed. Right. Then you get into the 21st century. 2000 to present is called by some of the post-Columbine era. Notable incidents, the Virginia Tech shooting in 2007, a college shooting, 32 people were killed. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I do.
That's crazy, man. And what's interesting to me is that one, for some reason, is easy to forget. 32 people killed, but we remember the ones who were I don't understand that. But that's a phenomenon. I was like, I can't believe I forgot that. But that was 2007.
We tend to remember the elementary and even middle and high school ones, I think, a little bit more than some of the college ones for whatever reason.
I think so, because children, right? And high school students and children, that's true. Sandy Hook Elementary was 2012 in Newtown, Connecticut. 20 children and 6 adults were killed. Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in 2018, shooting in Parkland, Florida, killed 17 students and teachers. And of course, recently Uvalde down in Texas. And so it ignites what I know you're going to bring up, and you've got a fascinating story, and I can't wait for people to hear that. But it made people makes people begin to be aware, at least hopefully, of mental health issues. Because the ultimate issue, again, is the common denominator, which I'm going to point out here in a second, is the person, not the implement. Mm-hmm. Because you got to talk about non-gun violence in schools. Those are also issues. Almost daily, almost daily in our schools, there's some manner of physical assault that takes place. Most of them don't get brought to the attention of school leadership because there's a sense of shame about it. You know that happens because it gets posted in social media sites of beatdowns in bathrooms. Mm-hmm. All right, so that's happening on the daily. Ongoing bullying, and I mean that in the sense of like targeting somebody and physically abusing somebody. Other kinds of aggressive acts, whether it be theft, damaging of a car, or damaging of a person's personal property. You've got then the increased attacks on teachers in certain areas where teachers are having to remove pieces of technology and students are assaulting teachers physically, kicking them, hitting them, punching them. In one case recently where a huge young man absolutely beat up this teacher and she was assaulted. There's video of this stuff. You got sexual violence that happens where young women are assaulted sexually. You got physical violence that happens under the guise of playfulness. And I got to be very careful what I say here because I'm not going to go down that road because I'm going to get angry. And this is not a place for me to just voice everything I want to say, but non-gun related violence that even happens in sports stuff where you have unsupervised locker rooms, where something may start out as playful and turns into an actual fight in which a kid or other kids get hurt. Unsupervised by coaches who break rules in regard to when you're supposed to be in a building and not be in a building, because after all, we've got to win. In order to win, we got to get extra 30 minutes of lifting. And so I know we're not supposed to be in the building by this time, but you're going to be here by then, and there's not going to be really supervised. And if you get I almost said if you get something happen to you, well, we just don't talk about it, right? Yeah. Then hazing. Hazing is a school violence issue in which...
Got a story on that too, by the way.
There you go. I could tell stories. I could tell, and I'm not talking about what we've seen and what we've watched happen, particularly in military settings. There are handbooks that are related to how students are to discipline one another in a military setting in a college environment that are contrary to the actual university's code of conduct.
Like a code red?
Like a code red. They don't call it a code red, but they legitimately exist. And so and so school violence, and it's accepted. Mm-hmm. And so, but nobody wants to talk about hazing. They don't want to talk about knife violence. Knives are used. Again, example, the 2014 Franklin Regional High School stabbing in Pennsylvania. There's shooting, but then there's the stabbing. And so school violence goes beyond the gun. And so what I want people to recognize is it's not the knife. It's not the fists. It's what is happening in the soul of that human being who decides that hurting another human being is a solution. And so...
Can I add a couple numbers real quick to yours? I know you got it.
No.
Because a lot of people think it started with Columbine. Like that's kind of considered off the start of this, which I'm glad you brought up the history that it's not. But since Columbine, there's been 417 school shootings.
Right. And that like these are just some people don't even know about.
Right. Like there's just been so many.
Right.
383,000 students have experienced gun violence at school since Columbine.
Holy cow.
But to put that in perspective, because I'm glad you brought up non-violent or non-gun violence.
Yeah.
So just a couple numbers from a study that was done from the 2021 to 2022 school year. 67% of public schools recorded at least one violent incident. 67% of all schools, public schools, said there was at least one violent incident in that year. And they reported that there was about 857,500 violent incidents.
857,000
were reported. 479,500 nonviolent incidents in public schools just in 21 to 22. So again, if you're going back to what I said, so the gun...
since Columbine.
Right, that's just in that one school year. 383,000 have experienced gun violence at school since Columbine. Now, real quick, I wanted to clarify. I don't say that to minimize gun violence.
No.
By any means. There's definitely a difference between a fight at school where a kid gets a broken nose and 6 people dying in a school shooting.
Absolutely.
That's not what we're trying to say.
Correct.
But just want to say that there's so many more violent incidents that happen in the school settings.
Absolutely, 100%.
Sorry to cut in there, but
no, that's good. I'm glad you did. That's fascinating information. And so what I also find fascinating is you have experienced one of these. So tell us about your story. This is one of those people probably didn't even know happened. It's off the radar. The news media doesn't. I mean, it did at the time, but it was local. Tell us about your story.
Yeah, so Heritage High School, Conyers, Georgia. This was May of '99, so it was exactly a month after Columbine. We were getting ready to finish the school year. In fact, it was I want to say right kind of towards exams. It was like the last week of school, basically. And all of a sudden, this is before school started, so we got a lot of people hanging out in the commons area. We called it like cafeteria and just, like your big central open room in front of the office, that kind of area.
Right.
I had just finished up at, we called it, it wasn't Youth for Christ, but it was like Fellowship of Christian Youth, so FCY, similar to FCA kind of thing. I had just finished up actually speaking in that and had made my way to the Commons area to see some friends before school started. All of a sudden, we start hearing pop, 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 pop.
Wow.
Now, there's a history of this week being senior pranks.
Okay.
So when you first heard it, and I corroborated this with many others afterwards, almost everybody thought it was firecrackers, senior prank.
Okay.
Until some people started noticing there's a guy with a gun.
Wow.
And people started running. Okay, and so TJ Solomon, this is the young man's name. Somebody I knew, by the way. Played baseball with him.
Wow.
Played right field, real quiet.
Yeah.
Not a bad kid, just a quiet kind of loner. Had some social issues, maybe like just socially awkward a little bit.
Sure. Came
in, had a .22 rifle, shooting around the Commons area.
Wow.
We all take off running down the hallway because I don't know what else to do. I'll try to wrap it up here a little bit, but I want to give some important details though. So we're all running. 6 people ended up getting shot. I knew 5 of those 6. In fact, one of them, a friend of mine who played football, baseball, kind of a classic redneck hunter guy, got shot twice in the leg, pulled one of the bullets out of his leg with his own fingers.
Dang.
He was kind of just one of those tough guys. Guy that bangs his head on the squat rack, and maybe not everything there. Good guy though. But all that to say, so 6 people get shot. No one ended up dying, so that's why it wasn't as big news.
Sure.
But here's what happened. So after the .22 was out, TJ went outside, had a .357 Magnum handgun. The most powerful, kind of the dirty, hairy kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So 22 did some damage, but unless you get hit in the right spot, you usually can survive. That's a smaller round. You know much more about guns than I. But 357, you get hit with that, it's probably not going to go well.
Yeah.
So he fired a couple of shots of that as kids were running through like a wooded area between the school and the football field, just trying to get away. Thankfully, didn't hit anybody with it. Ends up putting it in his mouth as a vice principal came up to him. Vice principal talks him out of killing himself.
Wow.
Gets the gun from him. So thankfully no one else dies. I end up getting in a car with a friend and we drove to our church, was about 2 miles away. So here's what was crazy. And this is 1999.
Yeah.
So there's no social media.
No.
But there's still fast media. My grandmother was in Australia. She knew more about what happened before I did, having lived it.
Wow. How?
Just that's how fast it was spreading. There was news people there.
Okay.
There was choppers coming over, and so all this to say this we experienced this, walked through it. They ended up kind of canceling the rest of school. We came back for like one little day to get stuff, but basically the school had ended, and
wow.
When I say I experienced it, I never saw him shooting, but I did. Like I said, I did know him. He got out, I think maybe 4 or 5 years ago. He spent 20 years or so in jail.
Okay.
Thankfully found the Lord in jail.
Wow.
But what I want to hit on, and I think this is going to help set us up,
Sure.
is when he was interviewed after this in prison, they'd asked what happened, and I think there was some bullying, but that wasn't the overall thing. He just, again, there was some social awkwardness. He was alone, like didn't have a lot of friends, hardly any friends. He said it just started as a thought one day. He was like, what if? And he said, I just kept thinking through it and picturing it and battling through it. Parents had guns open, accessible at home, just in the cabinet. got them easily, got them in. You didn't have any kind of metal protectors at this time. There was no security. Just walked right in. Carried them on the bus. We actually rode the school bus, and had them in his pants, and nobody had those big Jinko jeans. You remember those big jeans?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
But I'll never forget him saying that. And he said when it came time to do it, he's like, I wasn't scared. I wasn't nervous. He's like, I wasn't anything. He's like, it was just, I had practiced it in my head. He's like, it wasn't, he even talked about, he's like, I wasn't like trying to, it wasn't anybody specific.
Wow.
Like it was just all the hard stuff that had happened in his life. Kind of just, well, what if I did this?
Were there home life issues?
There were some. I don't know all the details on that. I don't know that it was necessarily abusive, but I remember there definitely being some issues. Mostly, I would say more of not disengaged
really
home life, more so like just kind of left on his own.
What's interesting, we know this now from neuroscience, neglect, no matter the degree of it, is experienced in the human brain. Like the way the brain processes neglect is the same way it processes physical violence.
Right.
Which I don't know if people realize that or not, which I would say, man, if people are listening to this and get into studying neuroscience, get into Kurt Thompson, you've heard us say it's Caroline Leaf, Kurt Thompson, Pete Scazzaro, jump in and start reading good neuroscience, and TBRI is going to help you with that. Like get down Dr. Purvis, watch the YouTube videos that are available. You will start to discover some of that. So at home, he might not have been physically abused, but neglect and loneliness like that is in the brain. The wiring happens the same as physical abuse. So his brain was registering that in a way that none of us probably realized was happening.
Yeah, and I think because I think there was definitely an impact from Columbine that probably kind of helped expedite things.
Yeah.
And I think this is also part of the thing too, is the way that school shooters are. I don't want to say they're celebritized, but there's a I don't even know how to say it. Like, you know, like it's we there's so much emphasis put on the shooters.
Sure.
That they become famous.
Sure.
And I still think there's a correlation of that too. It's especially for these like TJ who weren't known. It was kind of like, well, they'll know who I am now, kind of thing. And, and that's part of that mental health issue. Not because again, it's not a gun thing. It's but I know if I use a gun,
that's right, then
I'm going to be known.
Well, there is even this week, end of last week, right after that, and we had soft and then hard lockdowns at county and city schools here.
Yeah. Multiple counties around us.
Yeah, and we've had 2 kids arrested here as a result of those things because they had lists and they made threats. Mm-hmm. And so whether it's like, oh, I can be known or somebody can find out my issue if I do this, there is a component of picking up on that. It's whether it's copycat, whatever it happens to be, there is a component of that happen. Well, I guess it's my turn now. And they begin to go with it. And truthfully, I'm sitting here thinking, like, with the media coverage as it is, it's almost hard to avoid that.
Yeah. 100%.
So how did you and your classmates respond to that? Like, what was the after effect emotionally from you guys as you experienced that? Like, what was the after effect?
Yeah, it was tricky because it was like right at the end of the school year.
Right.
So for a lot of like I said, they opened school back up and they had some people available, like some counselors and folks to talk to kids.
Yeah.
I honestly, it was a lot of the student on student stuff, just being there for one another because there was a lot of fear. There was a lot of, even some people didn't come back. Like I would say, a large portion didn't come back that day, still out of fear.
Sure.
Worried maybe could something else happen?
Right.
All understandable. But yeah, there was a lot of emotions because it was, like I said, there's still a little bit of emotions from what happened at Columbine because that was it was just so jarring that could happen. Like even though those other ones have existed, at that point there was no reason to ever even think about that happening.
Sure. Did TJ make any statement in regard to Columbine being a model for him to learn from, or did it embolden his plans, or did he have those plans before that?
He had the plans before, and when I say plans, it was more of just thinking through what would I do. It wasn't like hardcore, like battle plans kind of things.
Sure.
He referred to Columbine. I think it was more of just maybe a catalyst to like, okay, I can go through with this now. Then I don't think it was a big. I don't think it played a huge role in what happened, other than maybe expediting it and kind of giving some reasons why.
Yeah. Well, we know, and I'm not saying that anger is a motivation and all these things, but we know anger is a secondary response, right? So anger comes as a result of some manner of something. So there's primary that happens. Anger is a response to that. So seeing from the Enoch Brown massacre in Pennsylvania to all the way up to what happened at Appalachee, those who do that are prompted by something.
Yeah.
Right. Whether it be those Native Americans who may have likely, I don't know their motivation, but they were motivated to stop something, and so they used the means at their disposal to do it. This student and the difficult life at home, and a mom in and out of prison, a dad who's been verbally and possibly physically abusive. Being mistreated at school, possibly because we're hearing, I don't want to say too much because some of it's probably conjecture at this point about maybe decisions they've made, this student has made. And so their response to that is this deeply rooted resentment or anger that comes out toward other people. And so it kind of gets us into that place of kind of dealing with the issue of trauma and on the brain and the soul of a human. And what do we make of that?
Yeah, I think that's 100% why almost all of these you can take back to some form of trauma. And again, trauma for a lot of people, I think, just equate that to abuse and neglect, like severe abuse, neglect. And a lot of times it is, but there's also so many different forms of neglect too. We talked about like emotional neglect, physical neglect.
And can I say this before I don't want people, because I think there's a movement against that, because some people misuse that word and claim that everything's a trauma. And so therefore there are people saying, I'm tired of people saying trauma's the reason. I'm like, no, don't do that. Like, don't do that. Even though some people may misuse that word, does not negate the reality that what we know now about the human brain and difficulty is real. Yeah. And so don't dismiss trauma because people misuse it. It's real. Its effects on the brain are real. The research is real. We're dealing with it here in the building today. So anyway, I just felt compelled, if people listen to, oh, here they go. They're woke leftists. They're talking about trauma. No, don't say that. That's a garbage response to actual science that's true. Right. And so anyway,
we're not talking about you misgendered me trauma. I want to be very this is deep rooted. There are different forms. You got acute trauma, where we're talking about maybe a parent dying or going through a car accident or a school shooting, like where there's usually one or two major incidents. Yeah. What we're mostly dealing with is complex trauma or chronic trauma or continual trauma, where there's been this buildup through the years.
And what's fascinating is to do acute childhood experiences, ACEs, and ACEs. You can find an ACEs thing you can do free online. If you want to test yourself, do an ACEs thing and find out, and it'll open the door. Anyway, continue. There's so much here. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry I keep interrupting.
No, it's okay. It's important stuff, and I know you're as passionate about it as I am.
Well, we're both practitioners. We're TBRI practitioners, so we know this stuff.
ACES, that's ACES questionnaire. If you Google that, it's 10 questions. It'll give you a score and explain what that score means, and I encourage you to take it. So what I want to hit on a little bit is what you talked about. I don't want to go spend all of our time on the brain, but I think it's important to give a little bit of understanding, particularly when it comes to what we call the fight, flight, freeze, and now fawn response, because that's the response to fear, trauma, stress, right? So real quick, and then I'm going to throw it back to you. Short-term and long-term stressors both set off the sympathetic nervous system. That's the part of your body that activates your trauma and stress responses. When this happens, your body releases hormones like adrenaline and cortisol. When your sympathetic nervous system becomes activated, your body prepares first for either fight or flight, typically, and then we've also seen used to mostly just be fight or flight. Then freeze came along. We've also talked about fawn. Right. But this causes your heart rate to go up. It prepares your body for movement. but your nervous system can shift to a freeze or fawn response if your body determines that fight or flight will not be effective in managing the stressor at hand, which this is all fascinating to us.
Yeah.
It may not be to you, but...
And fawn, by the way, is the kid who's the joke teller, maybe they're the class clown, and they distract with humor or loudness or being silly. That's fawning.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah.
So let's really quickly looking at the brain, our magnificently created brain the Lord gave us, because a lot of this stuff we're talking about happens so quickly, like you don't process what's happening.
Yeah.
But when someone experiences a stressful event, the amygdala, which is an area of the brain that contributes to emotional processing, it sends a distress signal to the hypothalamus. This area of the brain functions more like a command center, if you will, communicating with the rest of the body through the nervous system, so that the person has the energy to fight, fly, or flee, I guess we should say, or freeze.
Yeah.
The sympathetic nervous system functions more like a gas pedal in a car. It triggers the fight or flight response, providing the body with a burst of energy so that it can respond to the perceived dangers around us. And then the parasympathetic nervous system acts like the brake. It promotes rest and digest response that calms the body down after the danger has passed. I'm almost done for people who I'm thinking I'm nerding out. After the amygdala sends a distress signal, the hypothalamus activates the sympathetic nervous system by sending signals through the autonomic nerves to the adrenal glands. Excuse me. So, but why this is important is, number one, it gives us insight on, when we're talking about school shootings in particular, it gives us insight on the shooter, but also on the victims.
Right.
Because, and I go back to my example, there were, like, I had to grab a couple of kids who were just standing there watching.
Yeah.
Like, I literally had to grab them and say, run.
Yeah.
Because for some, again, it takes a while to process, but others need to process, and until they have processed, those signals that tell them to move or to run from danger or not. That was the reason why, you see people, if somebody comes into a bank with a gun, you got people immediately who take off running. You got the guy, the person who may try to go attack the person with the gun, and then you got the person who just doesn't know what to do. Yeah. And none of those are wrong. It's just how your body and your brain responds to those stresses and those triggers.
That's right.
But it's important because it gives us a little bit of understanding about maybe that person's history, what's happened in their home, and then schools being a battleground for this is really interesting, because oftentimes for kids who experience trauma at home, schools is their only safe haven. Yeah. But you might see them come out and take it out on the school. Yeah. And some of that, I think, is because of, why you all should suffer because I'm suffering, even if they're not processing that. Yeah. That's some of that. And then the rest of it is just for other various reasons.
And for littles, kindergarten, first, second, third grade-ish, fourth grade-ish, even fifth grade, sometimes their actions there are because they feel safe to actually respond in a manner they can't respond at home, because if they respond like that at home, they're going to get smacked in the face again.
Correct.
So when they come to school, we teach this brain model. Like, if this is your brain and you open this up, my thumb has been broke, so it can't go all the way in. But that's all those hypothalamus, amygdala. That's that inner stuff, and that's down in there. And then your prefrontal cortex and all the other parts of the brain out here. All this stuff right here is what fuels all this stuff. And so what's interesting in the fMRIs that they do of kids and adults who have lived in trauma and all that stuff, this part of the brain sometimes is 2 times the size of normal, meaning your brain is plastic and it will grow based upon how you use it, and its shape will shift based on how you use it. So if you're living a constant state of trauma, fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, this inner part of your brain is larger and it produces more cortisol, and so because it's constantly exercising, so it gets bigger, which means it's harder to tame, which is why behaviors on the parts of kids, you can't just approach them the same way you approach a kid whose inner parts are not that big. Fascinating, just sort of contrast to that. If anybody's seen Free Solo, Alex Honnold, I love climbing. Climbing World, he's the guy who free soloed El Cap. Crazy. I mean, if you watch that, it's like, you're puckered the whole time. It's crazy. But they did a study on his brain, and it's like, because he has no fear. And this stuff down here is tiny. Yeah. Tiny, tiny, tiny. So he quite literally, there literally is no fear. It's not because like the inner part of his brain is, for whatever reason, tiny. And so it doesn't kick off where he's like, oh my gosh, this little hold right here is the only thing keeping me from falling 4,000 feet. Like my forefinger and my thumb and my little toe. He's just like cool as a cucumber. But you take a kid who's been in constant trauma, that inner part of their brain is just boom, boom, run, fight. Funny. And they're disrupting. And it's not because they're just innately a terrible kid. There's a lot going on in their brain. And in the education system, if you don't know that, you respond with external things that end up causing more harm than actually fixing the internal problem.
Yeah, and the importance here, and we call it survival mode. It's a survival strategy, and it's meant for literal survival.
Yeah.
And so when you've got especially children or teenagers who are in survival mode through what should be regular, normal activities and routines, the smallest thing can set those things off. So that's why when we train, we talk a lot about routine and preparing them. But these kids need 3 or 4 reminders. Hey, in 10 minutes. Or in 5 minutes, like they need that because the simple change in structure or scheduling can throw them off the deep end. And so we have to understand that, because if you understand someone's constantly in survival mode, then you begin to understand why they act the way that they do. We don't doesn't make it okay how they act, and certainly violence should never be a response to that. But we also have to begin to understand, well, what was going on that got them to this point, and why was it never addressed? Why was it never seen? And part of this problem too is because back when you both of us were going through school, there was a much higher level of discipline allowed. Now you can't do anything. Like me and my wife's a teacher in elementary school, and they send a kid to the principal office, and sometimes that kid just sits there and they're like, oh, you weren't, did you make a bad choice? You want some candy? It's like almost like a reward that they just get to go sit up there and hang out in the office, and then for an hour, and they send them back, and nothing has been done. Not even like a conversation to kind of get at the root of it. So if they can't discipline at school, and that kid's either getting poor discipline at home or no discipline at all, it's no wonder that those things happen.
Right.
And so I kind of want to. I know we kind of got to get close to wrapping up here a little bit.
No.
And then you may have some other stuff. I just have a question. If you don't,
ask away.
I want to kind of bring it back to kind of a spiritual thing a little bit here. So I want to get your thoughts on this, because a lot of times we just hear, well, it's just a sin issue, and it is. Everything is a sin issue if we're just being honest. I don't want to make light of there's sin at place. There's separation from God. I'm not saying that's not important, but I also think there's this level of, we kind of gloss over things by saying, well, they just need Jesus. And I'm like, yes, but Jesus created us in a way that we need other things too. I'm a big believer that pharmaceuticals are a big part of the problem, and who funds those making decisions? Big pharma. And I'm not anti-medication, but I'm anti-over-medicating. I'm anti elixirs of multiple medications that stimulate and stir these processes going that don't match with what's going on in their brains. So I'm anti that. And I think that could be 2 or 3 other podcasts. So I don't want to harp on that. What I want to get to for you is, as Christians, I don't even know the right way to ask this question, so forgive me if I'm a little kind of spacey here, but how do we get past just saying, well, they just need Jesus? How do we get past that? And how should we look at it from a biblical perspective when we focus on school shootings and the trauma behind some of these things, plus the gun ownership issue? All that together, like, how can we look at that from a biblical perspective and be able to have conversations the right way? Does that make sense? Kind
Absolutely.
of what I'm
it's multifaceted, right? And so I think, number one, we have to recognize the Lord said, the day you eat of it, you will die. So you displayed this trust in me by violating the one command I've given you, because there's already this fallen brokenness. There's an evil in Narnia already. And if you violate this one command, it's going to absolutely destroy everything. So don't do it. Well, they do it. And the end result is, the next chapter, you've got Cain murdering Abel.
Right.
And so, it is a sin issue. That's a no-duh. Like, for the Christian to have to state that first is like, it begins to be a cop-out. No duh. Yes, it's a sin issue. The question is, how has sin so raped the human soul that it now does that? And then that comes now, we have to recognize, that natural revelation or natural law is a part of created order, meaning part of our task, the Genesis 1:26-28 creation cultural mandate, is to steward and manage all creation. And that means knowing how the Lord made us, knowing how he made us connected to and out of, like we came out of the dirt and we're going back to the dirt until the great day of the resurrection. Our souls, we have to discover the physical component and the spiritual component. I think the biblical reality is we're a mashup of immaterial and material parts. And part of the, what does the proverb say? It is the glory of God to conceal a matter, and it is the glory of kings to search it out. Mm-hmm. And so part of our task in studying and learning creation is it's as kings, as stewards, co-regents over creation, part of our task is to learn how we function. And so, yes, it's a sin issue. The question is, how has sin pillaged us to the point that we are now capable of these kind of things? And so you're right. I think it comes down to multiple things. Number one, guns are accessible, and there is a market for guns that makes them accessible. And I would say we're in favor of good laws. But we also need to recognize that laws don't keep criminals from things. That's why they're criminals. And so if you want access to anything, you can get it. The question is, how do we help heal humans to the place that coming in and knifing a kid at school, sexual assault, hazing, shooting, verbal assault, physical assault, those things just don't happen anymore. And I think the list is almost infinitely long, but I've got a few. I think number one, home life is important. What's happening at home? Parents, how are you aware of your kids' emotional, mental well-being? How are you engaging them in such a manner that they are safe and feel safe to deal with their emotions and their thoughts? What kids then feed their soul? I think part of the ramp up we see in the history of school violence almost coincides with the advance of technology. I don't think that's happenstance. I think that's intentional. I think any type of media and the constant access to media and then the content of that media has a tendency to shape how we view the world. We can be desensitized to things.
A quick interruption on that, because I'm glad you brought that up, because the increase of cyberbullying, a big part of that is because now you have people who are too scared to stand up,
right,
and are too scared to pick on others in person, now have a platform to be terrible
right.
people to others. And I'm not saying all school shootings are a result of social media technology. I know you're not either. I just want to jump in there because
absolutely.
I think there's 100% a correlation, and I think that's primarily it.
That's right. I think so, 100%. And then social treatment, how we treat each other. And this is part of the problem when schools, A, get too big, and number two, you have this mashup of socioeconomic realities and a bunch of pagans. You put them in the same room together, and they might not have been trained to treat people appropriately, and so you start mistreating people, and it begins this horrible social cycle of mistreatment and labeling and hurting people who don't fit in a certain way. And then that social treatment leads to, at some point, that kid's had enough. And whether they end up bringing a gun to school or bringing a knife to school or punching back, it is a result of their treatment, whether we like it or not. They have either perceived appropriately or misperceived how they've been treated, and they're done. And so one of the things I'm always aware of when I used to teach was, and I would tell my students, like, be careful poking the bear. You keep messing with that kid, they're going to get enough. And when they turn around and knock your front teeth out, I'm going to say, well, you deserve that. I was one of those teachers that, well, you kind of deserve that. I mean, pick your teeth up off before me, walk you to the front. Let's call your parents. But you kind of asked for that. So just be careful how you treat people. So it's the social treatment. It's like, and the Bible teaches us, treat people the way they need to be treated. It's the golden rule, right? But social treatment. Then SSRIs, you're right. We now throw chemicals at emotionally manageable realities. I'm not, again, anti-medicine. I'm just saying medicine has its place. But what we've done now, and this is a result of naturalism as a worldview, we take naturalism as a worldview, there's no God, then we're just a biome. And then what the problem is, the biome's out of order. What we need is a chemical to get the biome in order. And the truth of the matter is, we're not just a biome. We are a mashup of physical and unseen spiritual realities, meaning that the brain is not the mind. That's why people need to read Kurt Thompson. Does the best job of defining the mind, which we've talked about on here before, is when you begin to understand the immaterial, conscious nature of humanity, there is a component of control we can have on the physical body, but it is hard work. It is labor. And I'm not kidding when I say there are times I would rather dig a ditch to California with a toothpick than I would to get control of my mind. It's hard. But when you can control your mind, you can actually control your brain's function. You can make your central nervous system chill by just, number one, acknowledging it, recognizing, I see you. I see you're flipped out. We talk flipping your lid. It's quite literally when your central nervous system is fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, you cannot logically, rationally think. You're not logically, rationally thinking, which is why people do crazy stuff and then they regret it later. This is why when husbands and wives get in a fight, they say something out of a fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, and then 20 minutes later, when their lid comes back down and they're reconnected to their prefrontal cortex, they realize, oh no, I can't believe I said that. And they regret it. Mm-hmm. That's because they're not thinking. They're just reacting. And so we've taken to throwing chemicals at that process as opposed to teaching management and self-control, which one of the fruit of the Spirit is self-control.
Yeah. We're over-diagnosing and over-medicating, but we're under counseling and we're under training, not only kids, but we're under training adults and professionals. This is why I've been such a huge proponent of TBRI in the school setting, because teachers by nature are reactive disciplinarians.
Sure.
And that doesn't work with these kids. And it's not their fault. That's what they've been taught. Like a kid misbehaves, you do this, and then you have 4 or 5 steps, or you pull a card or a color, whatever. They have to have those different things. And it's not wrong to diagnose or to medicate, but when you are only doing that and and you're not sitting that child in with a properly trained counselor who helps them understand the importance of regulation, teaching co-regulation, and then teaching how to self-regulate. Because we don't, one of the things we hear a lot in our side of when we talk about TBRI stuff is when they experience trauma, it fries their brain. It's almost 100%. Like sticking their fingers in an electrical socket. And so development is stunted. And so when you've got a 15-year-old who needs to be held like a 4-year-old, there's a reason for that. It's not because they're necessarily just immature. It's because, no, they've been deeply wounded. And along the way, no one has walked them through, no one's helped them heal, much less taught them strategies to self-regulate when their engine's too high or when their lid is flipped. Yeah. And if we don't do that, then the medication's really just worthless. And if nothing else, it might even be like pouring gasoline on a fire in some instances. And so, again, not anti-medication, not anti-diagnosis, but we've got to stop overdoing that without anything on the other side. And I think that's really where the big gap is in our country.
I think so. And the medical industrial complex is a $1 trillion industry to the place that even with the Vaccine Act in the early I think it was 1986, not early, but 1986, where the vaccine companies were. This is fact. Like, you can go look this stuff up. I know people are going to get mad. You're an anti-vaxxer or you're a whatever vaxxer or you're a whatever. I'm like, the fact of the matter is vaccines were hurting people and they realized they couldn't make a profit. And so if people were constantly suing them, so they got the federal government to protect the pharmaceutical companies from lawsuits in regard to vaccines because they said, you can go read this stuff. It's online. They're innately unsafe.
Right.
Because you're injecting a dead virus. A live virus vaccine is dangerous for all kinds of reasons. Just do logically think that out. But when you put mercury or aluminum in your body with a dead virus to get your body tricked into responding to the dead virus, mercury and aluminum don't go anywhere. You don't pee that out. You don't poo that out. And they're both toxic. Mm-hmm. And so the correlation between being hurt from that, and it's just through the roof. And all that to say, they actually got the federal government to protect them. And so once they're protected from lawsuits on the part of people they hurt, man, they just start shoving stuff at you. And so when that industry then also influences the training of doctors, their first response is medicine. They write you a prescription. So when you're constantly over-medicating, I remember my mom had Alzheimer's and she died of a stroke. And the cocktail of drugs they had her on, there was no way. Me and my sisters would go, there's no way this is helping her. Because you start reading the labels about drug interactions, they're all interacting in ways that these drugs say they shouldn't be taken together. I'm like, well, who's prescribing them and why? And you're going, this is insane. It's the craziest thing. And so the over medication of our population is insane. And then another part is the poisoning of our food industry. The truth of the matter is, if people are unaware of the fact that processed foods are devastating our kids and the creation of allergies, and if you go back and look at the Google Roundup Ready corn and go ahead and just be prepared for what you read. But that's one of the reasons Roundup got sued so robustly, is they altered the chemical structure of corn in order for it to be able to receive Roundup and not kill the corn, but it would kill the grass so that they could harvest easier. And so as a result, you're getting in the chemical structure of the corn Roundup. So when you're eating corn back in the day that had Roundup Ready Roundup on it, you're consuming Roundup and the cancer rates through the roof. Well, that's not regulated. And so this is that place where there's proper regulation. And so when you have the poisoning of your population, and and government control on people actually doing good farming, producing good food, and you have this over-processed stuff that's full of chemicals, we're poisoning our kids. And so the correlation between mental and emotional illness, food, medicine, social treatment, what's happening at home, all these things combined to this horrible cocktail that sin has taken and used as an instrument to pillage humanity. The enemy's task is to destroy image bearers. He hates image bearers, did not want to share co-regency, did not like his place, Ezekiel 28, Isaiah 14. And so what happened is there's a war against us. And don't think for a second the enemy won't use all these things, because the enemy does. So is it sin? Yeah, but how complicated is that sin? What has sin done? That's what we've been trying to unpack. And so really for us, the issue is, how do we engage humans and humanity's ticking in order to help heal? What I find fascinating is it's people like Robert Kennedy, who we would question his spirituality and he's going to tell you he's a Christian. And I want to believe that. But so we're going to look at guys like him and go, man, I'm not sure where he's at spiritually, but you know what this cat's done? He's done the research. He's written the books. He's studied it. He understands how it works. And what we've got to start doing as people who we would agree with theologically, have to start doing that kind of research and doing that kind of work so that we can speak with a bibliocentric, a Christocentric authority from our research in God's creation to these things, so that we can say, that's why I appreciate Kurt Thompson, is here as a evangelical, highly educated doctor who studied the brain. I trust you. I'm going to listen to you. And so we need more of that. And so part of that is what we're doing in this building, more Christians. And what's interesting here is, not enough Christians in this. I love the fact that there are people in this building who aren't Christians getting trained with this, but what we need are more Christians trained with this so that they can go out full of the Holy Spirit using these tools to be healers and proclaimers of the good news. I know that's a lot, and I'm vomiting information, but it's bigger than the gun. It's bigger than the knife. It's how do we heal humanity? Because part of our task as Christians, Jesus said, Luke 10, 1-12, heal, and then say to them, the kingdom of God has come near to you. We have a responsibility to heal what's broken and preach this good news. And I think what we've done is we've focused on preaching because that's easy, and we're not interested in learning the neuroscience that God made. And I would argue you get to know the neuroscience. It's like Scazzaro says, you'll know him better. And I think Scazzaro's right. You get to know the Creator better when you study what He created and you go, my goodness, the heavens declare the glory of God. The brain declares the glory of God, the intricacy, the detail that the master creator Jesus wove together in the brain. It's like, my goodness, if that don't bring you to worship, you might not even be saved. But anyway, that's a lot. I need to stop. You probably got some takeaways or more stuff. I'm going to stop.
Yeah, we'll jump into takeaways. I think
do it.
This is such an interesting topic. We could probably go on for hours on the different areas, but we'll wrap it up. Number one, trauma is serious, and it continues to be an epidemic that hasn't been properly dealt with in our country. Children and students are dealing with more stress, anxiety, and uncertainty than ever, and we desperately need to find ways to help them heal and learn to self-regulate and not have to live in a constant survival state. Number two, we have to pray. Look, God is sovereign and in control, but we desperately need to be a people who pray. Pray for the safety of our students and educators. Pray for legislators to make wise decisions and not just be puppets for the financiers. Pray for the families of all victims as well as those committing the crimes. Just pray. Number three, as Christians, let us be very careful about the things we rally for and against. And what I mean by that is make sure that the things you are fighting for are things that represent the king and the kingdom well. That's a harsh reality for some, but we are citizens of heaven first, and our battle's not against flesh and blood alone. We shouldn't ignore society and national issues by any means, but let us sound the horn for Christ more than anything else and be consistent with our messaging. And then finally, I just wanted to end with the word of God. I think it's fitting today. This is Psalm 34, 11 to 19. Come, O children, listen to me. I will teach you the fear of the Lord. What man is there who desires life and loves many days that he may see good? Keep your tongue from evil and your lips from speaking deceit. Turn away from evil and do good. Seek peace and pursue it. The eyes of the Lord are toward the righteous and his ears toward their cry. The face of the Lord is against those who do evil and to cut off the memory of them from the earth. When the righteous cry for help, the Lord hears and delivers them out of all their troubles. The Lord is near to the brokenhearted, and he saves the crushed in spirit. Many are the afflictions of the righteous, but the Lord delivers him out of them all.
Amen. Good word, man. Thanks for ending with that. Guys, we hope this has been helpful for you. It might have been what you expected, but it's what we were compelled to share with you, and hopefully from a deeply rooted biblical worldview on how to address humanity in light of what's happening around us. Again, hope it's been helpful. If we left you with some questions that you'd like us to sound a little further, you heard something that maybe you didn't understand or like, hey, talk about that more, hit us up, theologyinthedirt@gmail.com, and we'll get that question and we work it back in and we will talk about it. We love when we get questions, and that means you're thinking, and your thinking is your victory, and it's good. It's good for you, good for us. You can check it out again, theologyinthedirt.com. You can find blog posts, you can find links to the podcast, sermon notes, all those good things. Leave us 5-star rating, share the podcast, do all the stuff, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Y'all take care. Have a great day. Out.